I'm Helen, therapist, author, and your host of the I Don't Think We Talk Enough About podcast, where each week I'm joined by wonderful guests who bring their warmth, wisdom, and wealth of experience to talk about the things I just don't think we talk enough about. And this week, I'm delighted to welcome back Josh Connolly. Josh joined me in episode 11, but we ran out of time to carry on talking about his inspirational journey and his work with the power of breathwork, but also his book, which looks at healing from being in dysfunctional families. So many of you sent in questions when I asked before about this podcast, and we just didn't get time to answer them. So Josh is back, and we're going to try our best to work through some more of those questions with you. But before that, I wanted to talk to Josh about the power of breathwork and the work he does in communities to really help people connect back to themselves. Josh, thank you for coming back. You're my first guest to come back for a second part, and I really appreciate it.
Well, I'll take the accolade. I'll take the accolade. Good to be back, yeah.
No, it's lovely. Thank you so much. And we just ran out of time, didn't we, last time?
Yeah. And we probably could have done another couple of hours and we still would have run out of time. It felt a little bit like that.
Yes, it was the questions that just kept coming in around dysfunctional families, and I felt it was only fair to bring you back to talk more about that. But I wanted to talk more about your journey into breathwork as a coach, because we didn't even touch on that last time. You talked about some of your community work you did, but I'd love to know how you went from, and your disclosure around being a football hooligan, to all the things you went through, which I know we covered some of them before, but how you then transformed into this incredible breathwork practitioner and well-being coach. What an inspirational journey, and I just want to hold some space for that here.
Well, thank you. And the journey to breathwork, I think, started. I'm just over 12 years sober now, and I think around about 6 years sober, I felt like I had exasperated every way of looking at my experiences. Like I was an absolute expert in rationally being able to describe what I'd experienced and what I'd felt. But I still felt like I was like yearning for something else. I still felt like there was something else missing. It was as if, if you had to empty a container of everything that I'd stored up inside, I felt like I was only sort of scratching the surface, if I'm honest with you. And I think what was happening is I was yearning for some sort of emotional release. And it's not that I hadn't been upset and I hadn't done the crying, but I felt like I wasn't reaching stuff. And I was trying meditation for a lot. A lot of people talk about meditation and mindfulness. And I think it's important to highlight this. Sitting still with my eyes closed, it doesn't feel good for me, right? So I was like constantly trying to meditate, and it would leave me feeling worse. And I felt like nobody that I asked was talking about that. Nobody was like, so I felt for a long time like there was something wrong with me, I can't do spirituality properly and all that kind of stuff. And so what I started doing was I would do my version of meditation, but in the sauna.
Okay.
So in the sauna, because I would sit in there for like 20 minutes, because I would have an element of battling against the heat, I felt like I was pushing myself, so I felt like I was doing something. Anyway, sort of long story short, I had this big experience in the sauna where like I went on this internal journey and like cried, like had a big emotional release around some things with my dad. And then I had a conversation with somebody afterwards about what they thought that might have been. And somebody said, it sounds like what happens when you do breath work.
Okay.
So then I was like, what? What do you mean when you do breath work? And then the next thing you know, I did a full sort of conscious connected breathing session with somebody online. And I knew instantly after doing one session that I wanted to find out more about it and be able to take it to people, yeah.
Okay, what happened? What did you notice that happened in that session you did? Because breath work is incredibly powerful and is backed by neuroscience as well, isn't it? As being one of the most transforming things in feeling safer in our body. And I've heard the same thing about meditation. I love meditation, but the way it can be problematic for people is they're left with their thoughts. And actually the last thing I want to do is be left with their thoughts. So we talk a lot about in therapy about getting to a certain place where you can be ready to do meditation. And yoga's the same. You know, yoga can be incredibly emotionally releasing for people, and too much to be still. It's too much to be still and vulnerable in that moment. If you're in a survival mode where you want to fight, flight, I don't want to stay still.
Yeah.
Let me move. So even as I say that, I can feel my body tense, you know, that I don't want to be told to sit still and be left with my thoughts. But breath work moves you away from your thoughts, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But still provides your body with the safety and the stillness. So do you want to talk about that experience?
Yeah, look, and what you've said there about the stillness, for me, it's even deeper than just being alone with my thoughts. My body, my nervous system, probably for a number of different reasons, but like I grew up in a lot of chaos when I was younger, right? And so when everything was still and silent and just as it's supposed to be, they were the most stress-inducing times for me as a child, because it meant something was coming. So I think, like I say, there's more than one truth with a lot of things, but I think also if you add in my level of sensitivity as a human, that I think I was born with a level of that probably turned into hypervigilance based on my experience. I'm not somebody who does well in physical stillness. Now, the reason I highlight that as being important, physical stillness, when we look at like this stuff in the West, so like meditation and stuff like that, I think we have a very like one-dimensional view of it. We think that the ultimate goal is to sit in the lotus position, still, reflecting on my thoughts and almost being unaffected by them. For me, I have to be a lot more somatic in the way that I approach this. So following a breathing pattern, a certain breathing pattern, it becomes a little bit like, to liken it to something that people might resonate with. If meditation is like a gentle jog like to go on a long run, a marathon, conscious connected breathing in the way that I deliver it often is a bit more like HIIT training.
Okay.
So you're doing like these big, heavy breaths. You're focusing on nothing but the heavy breaths, which very quickly quieten your thoughts. And then by the end of the breathing practice, you're in that stillness. Yeah. Internally, you're in that stillness, but you may want to allow your body to move. And the movement and the understanding of the need to be in my body is what's so important to me.
Of course. And you found that through even just your first breath work.
Yeah.
And then you went on and trained.
Yeah. I trained with a guy called John Paul Crimmy from in the States. I looked at lots of different ways of doing it, and he was the one that resonated with me the most. So he finishes his with a big scream. So that's what, when I do my big sessions, we finish with a big scream. It's about completing the cycle, because I think what so many of us struggle with is not being allowed to have our voice, not being allowed to have our authentic emotions when we were children for whatever reason. So I'm an emotional person. When I was a child, I saw my mum's pain, so I didn't want to bring my emotions to her. I didn't want to burden her. And so my healing journey is not about getting to a place where I'm happy all the time, which you can fall into the trap of. My healing journey is about coming back into my body and allowing those emotions that I pushed down to find a way out, and to find some freedom. Yeah. And that's why people can have it's not an exaggeration to say people can have big life-changing experiences. And by life-changing experiences, I don't mean that they go from being in constant pain to running off into the sunset, but people really do release a large amount of trapped emotion in one session. Yeah.
I'm hearing more and more about the screaming thing at the moment. It's doing the rounds on Instagram and TikTok, but that about the release. And I love the way you bring in about the somatic work. And what we're talking about here is a bottom-up approach, which is where we're using the body to feel safer, which then sends the messages to the brain that our body is safe, which then brings our executive functions of our brain back online, and we can connect with ourselves in a much safer way, as opposed to a top-down, which is a talking cognitive way. And I am seeing, I mean, we've had people on the podcast before talking about the power of somatic work and body therapy. It's not about healing completely. It's not about healing the trauma. It's about knowing what it is, what it feels like to feel safe in your body again. And for some people, they've never known what that feels like.
Yeah.
And what you've started to experience, or what you are experiencing, and what you are showing the people you work with, is the micro shifts that can happen with breath work, that change is possible. And that's what we've got to look for. And I think it's about, we mustn't say, that, as you said, that everything's going to be completely different or better for you when you've done this. Look for the micro shifts, and it's a process. It's just a process, isn't it? And it's starting it. So what kind of results are you seeing in yourself and with the people you work with?
For me, it released a lot of tension from my body. So probably the biggest shift, and this is just a personal experience, right? But one of the biggest shifts I had is I don't get as much back pain anymore since I started doing breath work, because when I trap my emotions, I'm tense a lot. And it's not sometimes until after I've done a breath work where I go, wow, like my body's been so hunched over in a survival protective kind of state. It releases me from that. It gives me more opportunities to be present more regularly in my life, because I feel like life sort of twists me up a little bit, like regularly. That's what life does to me. And again, rationally, I can rationalize all of that stuff, right? And I can talk about all of my experiences in a rational way. But that doesn't get to the crux of what I'm feeling and what I'm experiencing. It doesn't alter the safety in my body that you talked about. So that's like my personal experiences with it. Everyone that's coming to do the breath with me, and I use it in an online program that I run, where we use it to be able to access a bit of a relationship with like your inner child, and people are having huge experiences from that, to feel reconnected with themselves and break down barriers. You know, one of the things, particularly with the scream, and just quickly on the scream,
Of course.
there's research that shows that if you were to just stand outside and scream, that it can feel good in the moment, but it can cause issues with your hormones that actually in the long term is not that good for you. But when it follows a breathing pattern in the way that we do it, it's different in the way that you release it, because you're completing the cycle. But what I've found for a lot of women that do the breath work is, particularly in Western culture, and it may be similar in other cultures, but the West is the only one that I can speak on. From teenage years, girls are not allowed any big emotion. They're particularly not allowed to be angry. And when I say not allowed, what I mean is if they are, then they are labeled very, very quickly. And what I'm recognizing with a lot of women, when they do the breath work in this way, in like a big way, and they have that kind of scream and emotional release at the end, they're realizing that they have so much of their voice and their anger, appropriate anger, trapped in their bodies, because they've just not been allowed to have it. So it's huge for them in that way. And then with men, it's releasing a lot of that emotion, like people are saying they cried for the first time in like 30 years when they do it, since they were a child. And if it's in there, my belief is that it's better off coming out.
It is, and it says so much, doesn't it, about, I think for people listening, about how much the body stores emotion. And it's not just the emotions we think about, the way the body stores tension, the way our muscles do that tension tight, to have back pain. I've heard such similar stories to what you've said as you can imagine, around back pain. You know, someone having back pain for years, they started therapy, and within 2-3 weeks, I'm like, gosh, there's an ease to my body that I just haven't felt for years. And I'm really pleased that you mentioned that you can do all the talking, but your body doesn't feel it. And then when you come back to the breath work, it's like, right, I've communicated with the body. And I think when we talk, and I've had this conversation with a few other guests on the podcast, when we talk about mental health, we need to also include the body. We've got to bring the two into alignment.
Because when you say bring them into alignment, I would argue that we make a massive mistake by separating them, because the body doesn't separate them. Like so like the fact that we do is, I think, is actually ridiculous. Like in many ways, like I don't even really know what the term mental health means when we talk about it. Now I understand why we use it, right?
Yeah.
And I understand why we categorize it in that way, because it becomes a useful term to be able to categorize a certain type of conversation. But if you actually try and break down what mental health means, you know, even to the things we'll often say now, somebody is struggling with their mental health.
I know.
Like I don't actually like those kind of terms, because I think when we teach people to say they're struggling with their mental health, it feels like then they are almost taking blame for how they feel. So if you're in a job that you hate, and you've got all this stuff that you experienced when you was a child that you've never had the opportunity to talk about, maybe there's some stuff going on in your family home or something like that. If you feel like, if your emotions are really difficult in that moment, I wouldn't say that you're struggling with your mental health. I would say that your body's screaming at you. It's screaming at you to do something about it. But the moment we say struggling with mental health, it says the way that you're feeling is wrong, and your job is to become more mentally healthy so that you don't feel those things, right? But the work is, how do I explore those things? How do I reconnect my head with my heart so that the two are aligned? So for example, if I talk about my dad, right? I know rationally and logically, my dad had a problem with addiction. The way that he was and the things that he did were nothing to do with his love for me. They were nothing to do with the way that he felt about me. The fact that he left this world when he did was nothing to do with how much he loved and respected me. I know all of that rationally, and I can sense it and know that that is the truth. And my body doesn't line up with that.
No.
Because in my body are still the feelings of a 5-year-old boy who doesn't have that rational part of his brain to even be able to rationalize in that way. No. So what I think we sometimes push people to do is reach that rational place, which I just talked about. And then we don't give them the opportunity to know that these two things can coexist. So I can still feel a sense. I feel a sense in my heart. Was I good enough for my dad? Why wasn't I good enough for my dad?
I know.
And it's okay for me to feel that.
Yeah.
The journey for me is not to stop myself feeling like that. It's to love the part of myself that feels like that. And so how do I do that? Well, I be good to my body. Yeah. I listen to my body. I let go of societal expectations and what society expects I should do when I feel something. And so like now I will find myself rocking or stroking my arms or like doing a bit of tapping or letting my body move in a certain way, because I listen to my body.
Yeah.
And I do what my body wants now. And that's like life changing for a lot of us, for a lot of people who, you know, I have had a lot of uncomfortable experiences when I was a child. So when I talk about them, it makes people feel uncomfortable. And instead of how do we support one another in this discomfort, we race to try and get back to comfort. And it's problematic. Yeah.
Of course we do. I love the way that you brought in around a hug, the tapping, the giving the younger part of you what it needed, and about the power of inner child work. But I think it's really important we don't gloss over how difficult that can be for someone. And that can bring up an awful lot for people. And I'm imagining you doing some breathwork sessions, and there can be some quite deep emotions that come up. So I think for anyone listening, if you do try breathwork, just to really, if it does bring up some really difficult emotions, to really reach out to someone you trust. Because being alone within a child work can be quite triggering.
Yeah, well, look, one of the biggest things that we say at the beginning of all of our sessions is that we want to make this as accessible as possible. And here's the reality of what could happen when you do this. So if you leave here and you're alone and you don't have anybody to support you, anybody that you can reach out to, anybody that you can be with, then we say don't do it.
Right, it's a great caveat, actually.
Because like I say, it can bring a lot up, right? It will likely bring a lot up. And you need to feel in an adequate space in your life to be able to deal with that. So we talk a little bit about like a bit of personal responsibility, as in don't do this if you're not adequately supported, you know? Yeah. So we have a lot of people that come and they're already working with a therapist, or they have family and they have support around them. And then we do have some people that hear the extent of what they might experience and then say, I'm not ready to do it yet. Yeah. And that's the right thing. You know, people sometimes say to me, you scare a lot of people away with the way that you set the breathwork up. And I say, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. If it scares them away by me telling them the truth of what could happen and the exact truth of what they will need as a result of what could happen, if that scares them away, then as negative as that term sort of sounds, it's the right thing to happen. You know, they're not ready, and that's right. I think that's
really safe, really, really safe.
Yeah, it's important to do that. Yeah,
it's really important. But I wanted to come back also to the 5-year-old self that you talked about, and just for people to understand that our body holds the memory. Our nervous system holds the memory. So even though we can do all the work, it will come up, that old memory will come up. But it's about nurturing that part, as you said. And I think we touched on last time about Richard Schwartz, didn't we? And internal family systems. And it is about giving yourself the love and care that you needed then. And I think you do that so beautifully. Yeah. And I bet your younger self, I bet particularly your hooliganism years, or hooligan years, or whatever the word is.
Hooliganism, I think, is a word, yeah.
Hooligan self wouldn't imagine that you would be sat there in the future tapping, hugging, caring for the part of you that just so desperately needed caring for then as well.
Exactly.
You didn't know, did you? You didn't know that's what it needed.
I think that's really important. The caring and acknowledging is the important thing. Because sometimes people recognize that they want to interact with their inner child, and then when they get there, they're trying to make everything better again. And I had a real deep experience in one of my own like internal breathwork practices, where I was like with my inner child in my mind, and I can't see things when I close my eyes, so I don't often see things, but I get a sense that it's happening. And I had this kind of reflection in my mind that I was with my inner child, and they had this flower, right? And I'm like going, what do we need to do? How do I make this better? How do I change? And that the like 4 or 5-year-old part of me just showed me the flower. And in that moment, I realized, oh, you don't want any, you just want me to be here. You just want me to see you. So I think like that's a big part of the work. In the West, we get really caught up on self-development, self-improvement. So like, I've met my inner child. Now, how do I make everything better? And it's like, no. What your child needed was love for exactly who they are. They don't need changing. And just to finish this point, because it matters as well. When I look at my own childhood experiences, I don't recall a lot of the things that I talk about. Okay. But I've done enough work to listen to my body to get a sense of the feeling that was existing. Yeah. Now, I might have to do a little bit of filling in the blanks in some of those, but I know that my dad was an alcoholic. I can feel a sense of some sort of feeling that exists in my body. And then I can hypothesize of what it must have been like for the 3 or 4-year-old me. And then I can sort of piece together my experience and know that it doesn't have to be the full ultimate truth in my rational brain.
No.
But if I'm finding what I feel in my body and able to hold that, I can still get to where I need to be and work through what I need to work through.
And I'm really glad you made that point, because if your body feels it, there's the truth.
Exactly.
I love that. And I think that will help a lot of people to, hang on, I feel it. I feel it for a reason. And then get curious and then give it meaning.
Yeah.
Deb Dana's work's amazing on the body as well. Do you know much about Deb Dana's work?
I'll get excited when I hear about someone that I don't know as well.
So Deb Dana's done a lot of work with Stephen Porges on the polyvagal theory.
Right. Oh, I did look into the polyvagal theory in the past, yeah.
I think you'd really like that. And she brings in a much more... The polyvagal theory is fantastic. And she brings in a lot more practical help around it. So she's got loads of somatic workbooks, great books on understanding your nervous system at a real body level. I mean, her work's amazing. Bessel van der Kolk's work's amazing on The Body Keeps a Score. There's some incredible books out there. I'll pop them in the show notes so people can access them. But there's lots of information out there if people are curious.
Yeah.
My book, Choose You, is out now and offers you ways to prioritise you, meet your needs, say yes to you, develop a more secure sense of self where you feel you matter, learn to set boundaries, wrap yourself in self-love, find your authentic self, and ultimately choose you in the same way you would want those you love to choose themselves too. Choose You, out now. A couple of breathwork examples. Is there something that you would, as a short practice that you could do for the listeners?
I thought we could do something that highlights our breathing state, and it also highlights just how much we can tune into our body.
Okay.
All right. So you're going to do it, right? And are you going to do it as well? And then the listeners can do this as well, right? So I'll get you to do it, and I'll talk through exactly how we're going to do it, right? Okay. So we're going to use your hands. All right. So I want you to get your non-dominant hand, and this will sound strange at the beginning, but just stick with it. Okay.
Non-dominant. Okay.
So if you can, just close your eyes if that feels comfortable, right? Okay. And you take your non-dominant hand, and then you're going to take your dominant hand, and in the non-dominant hand, I want you to pretend that the most valuable thing in the world is in there. So that could be your kids, your house, your friends, whatever. And the job of the non-dominant hand is to protect that at all costs. Do not let anything get it, right? So you can squeeze it nice and tight and make sure nothing gets in there. Okay. Then with your dominant hand, I want you to fight against that hand to try and get it out. So with your eyes closed, I want you to literally fight as if you're really trying to get in there. One's trying to protect it, and one's trying to get in there, right? And really go for it, right? Good. Okay, stop for a second. Now let me ask you, what happened to your body when you did that?
Oh, I didn't like it at all. I was like heart tension.
Tension.
Like, trying so desperate to protect.
To protect, yeah. And what happened to your breathing?
It was shallower.
So your breathing was
I would say I'd almost stopped.
Almost stopped,
yes.
Yeah. And the relationship between your hands, so if you had to describe what your hands felt like in that relationship?
They didn't feel like my hands. This didn't feel like my hand. It wasn't connected to me at all.
Yeah.
But this was.
Yeah.
But this felt like something very alien, very something I didn't want.
Yeah.
Connected to me at all.
Good. All right. Now we're going to do something else. So just let your hands rest a second. Give them a little bit of a shake and a rub. All right. So now we're going to do the same thing again with the non-dominant hand. I want you to protect at all costs that finger's in there. Yeah. Protect it at all costs. All right.
Oh, I took a deep breath then.
Yeah,
right?
So take that deep breath and make sure you're protecting it.
Yeah.
Get really strong with it, right?
Yeah.
And then close your eyes again, right? And still protecting it. So I really want you to protect what's in that hand. And then you're going to take your dominant hand now, so your other hand, and I want you to support that other hand in protecting what's in there. So just bring your hand up and protect. And just be there for a moment, just protecting that hand, protecting what's in it. Supporting your other hand with your dominant hand. And just notice now for a second, before you come back round, keep your eyes closed, but notice for a second what's happened to your breathing. what's happened to your body naturally, and then think about the relationship between those two hands as well and what's happened there. And if you just want to open your eyes, and now can you describe firstly, what does your body feel like?
Oh, deep breaths.
Yeah.
And my shoulders had dropped. I knew my face had relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it felt easier.
Yeah.
Easier.
And the relationship with the hands?
So at first, so this was really tight.
Yeah.
And then when this hand, I didn't want to hold it tight, and it was just holding. It was just gentle. It was supporting.
Softened, yeah.
It was softened, and it was literally moving around as if like a comfort, and would stay. And then I noticed that as that became soft and gentle there, I released the grip on my dominant hand, my non-dominant hand. I released it. It felt safer to be with the other hand.
Yeah.
And so it felt like that was more connecting.
Yeah, connecting. Yes. And then you start to feel the energy move through your body.
All the way through my legs.
Yeah.
Literally like a completely different energy that comes in that feels safer.
Yeah.
And I think probably my speech is slower now than from
the
first.
Yeah, well, you can feel
everything.
I would argue, for the people that are listening, you can feel the energy in the room's different, right? So we're all connected. Do you feel it over there? Yeah.
Gosh,
yeah.
Really powerful.
So what you find is if you do that exercise in a room with, if we're doing a breath work, I've had up to sort of 60, 70, 80 people in a room, and you get them to all do it together, then you feel all that energy when at first they're doing this kind of, you feel disjointed and anxious and you're shallow breathing, and then you go straight into that next one, and we have music playing and stuff, and you put a bit of calm music on as they go, and then you tell them to stay there. You don't even need to teach them a breathing pattern, because everybody naturally starts to breathe in through their nose and out through their mouth, because your body knows exactly what it needs to do, but you need to create that safety. And what you'll find is a lot of people will start crying because we never slow down and support ourselves and be in our bodies. The world today that we live in now puts us in that stress response that we did when you're trying to get the thing out of the hand. You're always trying to fight, like, I've got to find the next thing, and what is it? And, you get your phone out, and that sends you into that shallow breathing state. And we never have the opportunity to, even the idea of putting one hand on another one and just allowing your body to connect with itself, to touch itself, to feel a sense of calmness in itself. We just don't do it. And it's so undervalued. And that's why I talk about the touch and the movement. And, the more that you work with your body, the more you can just live intuitively. Like I do everything pretty much intuitively now. I'm rarely in my head. That's a complete lie. I'm in my head.
How do you do that?
I'm in my head all of the time. God. But when I want to make a big decision, I try and come into my body and do that. Yeah. So, and look, in a funny sort of way, I've just highlighted for me what is like the real game of my life, which is how do I get out of my head and drop into my body? And how do I do that in moments that matter? Because I can do it fairly easily in these instances when I'm on stage, when I'm delivering breath work. How do I find these moments when I'm with my family, when I'm with my children, when, dare I say, all of my internal wounding plays out in the place where I want to be the most present, and that makes it the place where it's most hard for me to be present. And we don't talk about that enough, that, if you're a parent, the people that trigger you the most will be your kids. I have no doubt about that.
How do you work with that, with your background, your training? Because you're still human. And I think so often people assume that when you've done all this training and work that you kind of lose a human layer. But you don't, do you?
No, if anything, you just become more aware of how human you are.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people go on a journey, and this is why sometimes it can be a little bit deceptive when you see online, because a lot of people in the space when they're online have that sense that they need to portray that if I'm talking about this, then I need to show that I've got my stuff together, otherwise I'm not trusted, right? Yeah. And I haven't got my stuff together. That's the truth. I find parenting really hard. I wish I could be present more. I'm constantly having to make sure that I communicate to the people that care about me that my lack of presence is not a measure of how much I love them.
Beautiful.
So I have to do that. And then I have to revisit and explain to my children what's going on. So rather than believing that I'm going to get to this ultimate parent stage, it's having conversations with my kids and not being afraid to have those difficult conversations. So, say to the kids, I loved it out yesterday, but just so you know, I was really struggling to be present. It was a bit of a difficult day for me. So if you sensed that I was a bit distant, then well done, because you're picking up on a true feeling. But it was a me thing. I just want you to know that it was a me thing and not a you thing. That's what it is to be human for me.
It is. And Josh, as you're saying that, I think what you're doing is you're giving the listeners here who may be struggling that human layer of the importance of the difficult communication, the difficult conversation, but how that brings, we talk in therapy a lot about rupture and repair, and how that can bring such repair work to a difficult day. It's the starting point, as opposed to the ruptures keep building up, and there's no repair work.
Exactly.
And then the children, we'll come to the questions in a minute actually, but the children then start to feel the feeling of safety again because of the repair. And we just need to keep coming back to that all the time. But you're creating space for them to feel safe to talk about their difficult emotions.
Yeah.
Dad does, I can.
And safety for a child or a human being in general is when what you're being told rationally lines up with the way that you feel. My problem wasn't that I saw my dad do crazy things when he drank. That wasn't my main issue. My main issue was that nobody helped me comprehend that experience. So the way that I felt was suppressed. So if we recognize that we're never going to be able to be perfect and we're going to make mistakes, the solution isn't how do I get to a stage where I don't make mistakes and I don't mess up. The solution is how do I work with the mistakes that I make? And how do I learn to love myself enough and love the people around me enough to show up to the aftermath of the mistakes that we make? Because in the end, that's just accountability. And if you look at like my book and what I talk about in there, and toxic parents, the difference is there's no accountability, and that's the point.
Okay, which I think will come on to the questions because there's quite a lot about that. Josh, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
I like the humanness, and I think your children will really benefit from that humanness.
I hope so. I mean, my eldest is 18, right? So I always say as long as she phones me, as long as she knows no matter what happens in her life,
Yeah, she calls.
she can ring me.
Yeah, and you're there.
And I'm there.
Yeah.
Yeah. She probably phones me too much at the moment. I'm just thinking to myself, she's always saying I texted you 3 times yesterday and you didn't reply. And I was like, that's because you're just asking me for stuff that I can't deliver when I'm not in the same place as you.
Parenthood. We're always
Yeah,
parents.
exactly. Right, yeah.
Let's go on to some of these questions. I'll just pick out a few. So, do you feel you can 100% truly heal from being brought up in a dysfunctional environment?
I think it depends what you mean when you say 100% truly heal. And so to unpack the question, to give it an adequate answer, what I don't think you can heal from is the human condition. And I think that sometimes we forget that life is painful and suffering. And the only reason we get the opposite of those things is because those things exist, right? So I think what you can do is reach a stage where you feel like you have a level of agency, autonomy, and freedom in your life. And I think if you've grown up in your whole life in survival mode entirely, to find a place where you have that autonomy and that power in your life way more regularly, I would argue that's as healed as anyone is ever going to be. Do I think that I'll have to work on myself for the rest of my life? Probably, yeah. Does that mean that I'm not healed? I don't know, man. It's not like, what I would say is remove the destination, remove the destination, and know that life will ebb and flow. And if in any given moment you feel brilliant and like you're all healed, roll with it and enjoy it, and have in the back of your head that it will probably come to an end, and then you'll have to go through another phase as well. But don't miss the joy chasing the belief that you need to get somewhere.
I like that, the way you said that, and I think it's really important for people to lower their expectation of that 100% truly heal, but to have an openness that life could be better than what they're currently experiencing, that they could feel safer in their body, and that actually with each little bit of addition of safety, something else shifts. It's not an overnight process, which social media can sometimes have you believing. It's such a commitment to the process. The trauma never goes away, but the way we handle it can change. So we might find that we have more capacity for joy, or to be more present, or the tools available to feel safer in our body. So I think you're right. It's a process. It doesn't mean it's never not going to come back and make you feel like you're in it again, but you have an ability to be more in control of your body as opposed to your body being in control of you.
Yeah.
Is what I would say.
Yeah, I love that. And I think if you think of physical struggles that people have, we suffer lots of physical things that never ever fully heal, but we find a new way to live with them, and you don't run about saying it's never healed. You're like, yeah, no, that's done. I've done my stuff on that, So I think there's a level of that. You find new ways to manage and live your life with the new things that you learn all the time.
And I would add there, don't think you have to do it alone. Find support groups, find connection. We heal in community, as you know only so well. We really do heal in community, and it's worth taking the time to find that community. There's so much out there, isn't there?
Yeah, and actively build it. Actively work on it.
That, yeah.
The best self-work that you can do is building a community and building a circle.
Yeah.
Like, what am I missing in my life? Mothering figures, fathering figures. What are my relationship like with men? What are my relationship like with women and all the other genders and all of that? Like, how do you build a community that works for you? And again, by the way, you do that by being in your body.
Yeah.
Who needs to not be in your life? Who makes your nervous system go crazy? And why are they in your life if they do?
Shake them off.
Yeah.
I feel myself going, oh.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can feel it, can't you?
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you. When do you know it's the right decision to cut off a toxic family member? Now, I want to say this lightly, because we're not out there saying cut every person you have a disagreement out of your life. That isn't what we're saying. But sadly, for some people, as I would know as being a therapist, and you know from the research you did with your book, for some people it is a necessity. So we're not talking loosely here, are we? For some people it is a reality for their safety.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a long question there. But I got
No, it's a good question.
I don't want people to think that I'm saying, oh, just cut them off, because that isn't what we're saying.
I think that there is no solid answer to this question. I think that everybody is completely different, right? I always say, how close to the fire can you sit without getting burnt, right? But what I would say is this. You need to see the people in your life for exactly as they are. See all of the good in them. See all of the bad in them. See the exact person that is before you. Be honest with yourself about what they can give you and what you are able to accept in that relationship, and then you have a decision to make. And I think that many people will be able to adjust their expectations and have a new relationship with a parent around some new parameters, knowing that they'll never be able to show up to the version that you may want them to be able to show up to. I think that's true of most of us to some varying degree. And there are also people that when they look at a human being for exactly as they are, will see somebody who can do nothing but be, to put it bluntly, toxic and horrible all of the time, that do nothing but make them feel miserable. They only make their world smaller, and they take away any opportunity that they have to live some kind of freedom in their life. And if that's you, then maybe no contact is the only option. But I would also say, don't listen too much to people that don't understand your situation. Every time there's an abuse story that comes out in the news, everybody scratches their head and says, how did this happen? And like, how did nobody know? Why didn't nobody say anything? And yet, that's what we do every time there's abuse. Everybody turns a blind eye. So we have to see things clearly, see the truth, and then make a decision. That's the only thing I can say. Yeah.
No, I think you're right. And I think it's really important to mention that every situation is so different. And it's what feels safe for you.
Exactly.
Support. But I did want to make that point that we're not out there saying cut off. But I think in your book, you talked about some research about how many people are estranged from family members. It's millions, isn't it, in the UK?
Yeah. For a whole bunch of different reasons as well, right? Families are difficult, and that's the reality. But we have to see the truth. One thing I can tell you is that you don't have the power to change somebody else. They might change, but you might wait your whole life trying to change them, and and maybe they never will. So again, that needs to come into your thinking.
You can only change yourself.
Exactly.
I think it's so powerful. And also, when we spoke last time in your part one, you talked about the people in your group that were inspired by your story. So you can only change yourself. That could have a ripple effect on the others around you. Okay, I like this question. It might be the last one. How can you have a relationship with them if you heal, but they stay the same?
The simple answer is you have to adjust your expectations. So let's say you've got a parent who's emotionally unavailable, right? They just can't do emotions. They're emotionally immature, however you want to put it. But maybe outside of that, they're a good person. You know, they're not horrible to you or anything like that. They just can't show up to you and your emotions. Now, if you heal or you do some work on yourself, so you're now very in touch with your emotions, you can't then go and change them and expect them to then just be able to show up because you've been able to do that work. This might be a person that's never going to be able to have the emotional maturity to be there for you with your emotions. So you have a choice. I either spend my life trying to get them to see my emotions, and it probably will never happen, or it likely will. You certainly won't have any control over whether it happens. You could leave and not have a relationship with them and say that I'm unable to do that. Or you could adjust your expectations and say, I'm going to have the relationship with this person that they're able to give. Now, for me, the last option is the best one to try, because you have to see people for exactly who they are.
I know. And when you say see people for exactly who they are, there's that bringing in that level of understanding of it's not easy to see behind people at all, is it? We can't see behind. I always think of that example of the apple. I don't know if you've ever seen it, the photograph of the apple, and it's absolutely perfect, but it's actually placed in front of a mirror. And in the mirror, you can see that half the core's eaten.
Right, yeah.
And we don't get the opportunity to see what's in the mirror at the back. We just see this bright red shiny apple that looks perfect, but there's other stuff going, or not perfect, but other things going on. But when we move our thoughts from just thinking it looks like that big shiny red apple, or that person can't show up for me, or that person can't give me what I'm expecting, or because we're not doing the work on ourselves, if we then try to move towards what's happened to them to make them emotionally unavailable, I'm not saying it heals the relationship, but it can give you a layer of understanding around why that person shows up that way. And I think something shifts in you when you can perhaps see the inner child in that person. We're all walking around with inner child versions of us, aren't we, at times, with the projection comes out, or the fear comes in, the wound comes up. Just sometimes holding that awareness can help with perhaps some forgiveness on ourselves in that relationship.
Yeah, particularly if they're giving us, you know, if they do have the ability to give us some kind of relationship, you know.
True.
Particularly if they're that person that we've talked about who's emotionally immature, but in every other respect is a pretty decent individual, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Then definitely, I think the work, there's a couple of exercises in the book on healing my relationships to help people, to support people in doing that, to be able to see the human behind it. Because absolutely, in those instances, it can be so useful. Yeah.
And I think for people listening, there are different circumstances to every single person that might be hearing this and thinking about a relationship they know or they're in or finding difficult. Our answers might not work for them. It's about understanding we're trying to give some kind of answer to what these questions might be looking for.
Yeah, for sure.
And the last one I think is a brilliant question is how to be a more structured and functional family. I know.
The answer that pops straight into my head is you'll have to ask somebody else.
I know, and I'm sure that's going to make a lot of people laugh. But I thought it was a beautiful question to ask. They're clearly looking.
And I do have an answer. The answer is similar to, we've talked about it previously already, but it's the ability to revisit. Let go of the perfect family.
Yeah.
Right? You know, I often see it. There's a quote that floats about online all the time that says, give your children a childhood they won't need to heal from. I say good luck with that.
Yeah.
I say try and be as close to your children as you can so that when they need to do a bit of work on themselves, they'll feel like they can come to you. So then it's just about revisiting. It's about saying, you know, how do we be as functional as we possibly can? And I think the best way to do that is to have honest, open conversations about yourself with your kids. Just let them know. Like, kids know the truth because they're more in their bodies than we are, because we run away from our bodies in every way that we've talked about in this episode. Kids are in their bodies. They know the truth. They know it. They just need somebody to line that truth up with what they're feeling. Yeah. So if you do that and you say, you know what, yesterday when I lost my cool and I shouted, that was me. That was a me thing.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry. And, you know, I want you to understand that it was all to do with me and nothing to do with you. Like, we're humans. We're humans, and I mess up more than most. I think that the only thing I would say is I try as much as I can to take accountability as quickly as I can, so that everybody in our house, everybody's body matches up to what they're being told about their experience.
I love the way you take responsibility for that. And I think you're raising children to know that it's safe to take responsibility and it's important to take responsibility. But I also heard in there you talking about the fact that you're enabling your children to take up space to say how they're feeling. So in reaction to how you reacted, you're not shutting down their nervous system of perhaps feeling something when dad got like that. You're allowing them to hold that, or giving them that space to say, actually, I felt like this. Yeah. That shifts something in you, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely.
And then that shifts something for how you might react next time as well, because you're allowing them to give you information about their nervous system as opposed to just assuming.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going on inside a child unless we give them the space to share that with us. I love that answer.
Yeah.
I think it's a wonderful question for someone, because there's lots of stuff online around dysfunctional families, but actually there's not a lot of stuff online around how to be a functional family.
Yeah, it's because no one knows how to do it. No, but you're right. Yeah, there isn't, right? Because there isn't stuff out there. Yeah.
I think we need to go back to the real how to bring up children, don't we? And how to be human in bringing up the children, and how our children to see the humanness in their parents. We have to manage that boundaries and be safe with that as well. And, you know, a 6-year-old doesn't need to know about mum or dad's trauma.
Yeah.
You know, but they do need to know about communication and feeling safe in that house.
Yeah, yeah. And what I'd finish by saying as well to whoever asked the question is the fact that you asked the question says a lot. Says that you're probably already on the right road anyway.
I felt that.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I brought it in for the last question. Josh, Thank you so
Thank you.
much for coming in. That was a brilliant part 2.
Yeah.
And I can't thank you enough. I still had so many questions.
I'll see you in a couple of weeks for part 3.
Mate, I will definitely see you again, but thank you so much. And for any of the listeners, if you enjoyed today, it would be amazing if you could subscribe, follow and review the show. Your support means everything. Thank you.